Where I come from, an emotion is a signal. It's not a symptom. It's not a disorder. It's a signal. What we're struggling with today, whatever it is, was a solution back then, and then our job is to update it and make that connection. You can certainly know where all your patterns started and why, and still be caught in them. That can be confusing for people to have that awareness of why they do stuff, but then keep repeating it.
Now then, welcome to Reconnect, the podcast for people who want to heal and grow from life's tough times. I'm Joe Tudor, the founder of the Reconnect Club and a mental health keynote speaker. Today, I'm chatting with Anders Sorensen, a clinical psychologist with a PhD in psychiatry and the author of the book, Crossing Zero. We'll be talking about protecting ourselves from pain, how we can decode our emotions, and coming off psychiatric drugs safely. Right, here's Anders. What are mental health struggles?
Yeah, so I look at it like this. If you go through the psychiatry's diagnostic manuals, ICD and DSM, you're going to see a long list of behaviors, basically. Different emotions and ways of having it and different behaviors. So what we've agreed, someone has agreed to call mental health struggles, the diagnosis is really certain patterns of behavior and feelings. It's emotions and it's stuff you do about those emotions, behaviors, whether it be worrying, isolating, cutting yourself, doing drugs, reverting into psychosis can even be framed as a strategy. So these are motivated behaviors that we really need to understand, that it's not, and that's why we wouldn't call it disorders or symptoms, but more reactions, really. So whatever diagnostic label you look at in the DSM, you're going to find these behaviors, and those behaviors didn't come out of nothing. Like something happened in that person's life, which is why we'd want to insist on asking people what happened to them and not what's wrong with them or what's the best diagnosis to fit them. So usually these are what we would call emotion regulation behaviors. It's motivated behaviors. It's something people do to feel differently, usually to regulate or avoid some pain they have in their lives. And there's some wisdom in that, if you ask me, and where I come from. Like whatever, however destructive a person's pattern of behavior might have since become, there was some wisdom in what started it, if that makes sense. Like it didn't come out of nowhere.
I completely agree. And
that's good.
Yeah,
it is. Good.
We can settle in for the podcast now.
Yeah.
My experience was being given a label of depression.
Yeah.
And if I look at the strategies that I employed,
that
I used without even knowing I was using, the first most obvious one was staying in bed. I was tired, and it was like that was almost serving me. That it was like I had no energy, and it was like my body saying, "Just relax."
Yeah.
That's one strategy that I used. Another strategy was that it was so sad. I was convinced that I was worthless and that I wasn't good enough. And the strategy I used without knowing it was to use it as fuel. So I used that to say, no, I am going to prove that I am good enough. And I worked so hard.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Overworking, working too much or being perfectionistic. You could approach that as a strategy too. And that's a really important point. Strategy. It sounds so active. Deliberate, I'm going to use my strategy. That's not the way it is. But usually you wouldn't consider it a strategy, but once you do, it really changes things, right? Okay, this is not a symptom. It's not some malfunction. In fact, it's at that point in time, the best thing, we must trust this, you can do to regulate your pain. And sometimes that strategy is destructive. So you could even think of it as like a solution that causes other problems. That's really the recipe for the mental health struggles, when you get caught in those patterns. And what you'd see is really, when a lot of these different mental health struggles, is people getting caught in, almost like getting caught in their own emotion regulation, if that makes sense. How to constantly dull or numb or control some pain with something that works here and now. So you're going to find a lot of strategies that work in the short term, but then cause other problems in the long term. But the long term, as I'm sure you'll recall from being depressed or anxious, the long term is kind of off. That's not our goal when we're suffering, right? It's the short term. It's right here and now.
If I take my experience, the symptom in my case was that feeling really low, feeling fatigued, no energy, can't finish my sentence, and feeling completely worthless and feeling so bad about myself, that was the symptom. So in your framework, which I really like, that's the symptom. The strategy, the things that I used to overcome those.
Yeah.
So it is the overworking, the sleep. What are the most common strategies that you see people using as a clinical psychologist?
A lot of different ones, obviously. And that's really what varies by diagnosis. That's why this is transdiagnostic, which psychiatry, at least biological psychiatry to some degree, dislikes, because you could take whatever diagnosis and there would be some strategies in there. So whether that's overthinking, a lot of overthinking, like planning ahead, which is not as obvious a strategy as, say, taking a drug or distracting yourself or cutting yourself. That's very, concrete strategies. But, constantly playing out scenarios in your head, the what ifs. What if this? Well, then I'll do that.
Guilty.
That's emotion regulation too. Yeah, me too. And this is a normal human process. It's what we can do with our minds. We can project ourselves into the future, play out little scenarios, and then once we reach someone, okay, then I'm going to do that. Now I dare enter the situation. That's a strategy too, because it calms you, right? So obviously overthinking is a very used strategy. It's just more covered than an obvious strategy. It could be going back in time too, like ruminating and finding answers excessively, I should say. So these are normal processes, but they can kind of take over. And they can become uncontrollable, or at least that's your experience, that you have to answer all your what if thoughts, or if just that thoughts. And that's what the mind does, right? The mind doesn't like to be here in the moment, it likes to be past or future. So that's a really, I would say, popular strategy, at least nowadays, to overthink and to think that we need to overthink in order to enter a situation or continue. And problem with that basic psychology is that we don't just think, right? Our bodies follow. So if we could sit here in complete and objective safety and play out enough what if catastrophic scenarios, and our bodies would follow, right? We'd get anxious. So there's a bigger connection between what we think and these scenarios we play out than reality. And that's really the basic mechanism of almost all anxiety disorders.
My overthinking's taken different forms, like often perfectionism. That's a strategy that I employ. So real common strategies, overthinking, be it the past or the present. One that I touched on that I've used is working.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And drive, this drive to succeed at work. And I worked in a job it was a sales job, so it was about making money. And when I did well, I just saved my commission. I didn't spend it. And got to a point, like, what does this drive come from? What is really pushing me?
Yeah.
And one thing I really like about your book and your work is that you don't demonize people like me for these strategies. And I think that's really powerful because for me, if I look at the strategy of drive and work, that pushed me into a really good place. I built a career. Yeah. Like I went from being a grad with no experience to doing really well. So that strategy served me. But I liked what you said about the short term, long term.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of my work now is giving talks, and I go into offices, often with really driven sales teams, fee earners, people that are high performers. And I try and make this point that the fuel we use isn't necessarily bad, but it's not sustainable in the long term is my point. And I think that's why we often see a lot of people with burnout. So we've all got strategies that we use that might help us in the short term, but in the long term can cause us to have these struggles that get labeled as a mental health problem.
Yeah, that's kind of what gets the problem going, right? Remember, all diagnoses have like a criterion of duration. So we kind of agreed. It's not the behavior or the emotions themselves that are the problem. It's that they persist and then we can disagree with the 2-week duration and then you're depressed. But just the very idea that it's when things keep going, that's the problem. And one way for our strategies to keep going is if we constantly use the short-term strategies, which are abundant in the diagnostic criteria. So what we talked about before was important too, like this. So how do we frame something as a problem? It is a problem to avoid and overthink and be overly focused on safety. It is a problem. But how do we do that without demonizing it? That's really the problem, the thing, right? And we'd call it adaptive and maladaptive strategies. So just when we look at the outcomes of different strategies, it doesn't work to avoid or distract or suppress your emotions because they just keep tending to pop up, right? And then you get caught in this web of constantly. And people's lives may come to revolve around avoiding stuff. So, and then how do you help a person stop that? Well, obviously, then we need to go into the emotions. So that's the other part of the diagnostic criteria. Emotions, what's that? Where I come from, an emotion is a signal. It's not a symptom. It's not a disorder. It's a signal or a messenger. It wants to tell us something and it wants to move us. It's even in the word motion, emotion, right? It wants to drive us to do something. So the best example I can have that most people would follow is the not emotion, but sensation of hunger, let's say. It's pretty adaptive that it's unpleasant to be hungry. Like it would be a stupid mechanism. It was pleasant when our bodies needed nutrition. So our bodies need nutrition to survive, but it can't walk out and get it on its own. See? So there's a physiological need. It needs to motivate us conscious beings to do it. So it needs to send an unpleasant signal that we then have to decode. Okay, I'm hungry. My body is signaling me to go take something to eat. And when you do that, it shuts off. That's the way that regulates. Then understand that we don't just survive on food and oxygen and shelter. We have a lot of psychological needs. We need to belong, to move forward, to have hope, identity. We need to be challenged. Actually, we don't just want to survive. We want to continue to, right? To get along. We need to be part of a tribe, believe in something, have autonomy. That's a huge need. Try to look at a little toddler and help them with something that they're trying to figure out at their age. They'll be annoyed, right? If you try to help them tie their shoe or eat the avocado or whatever, it's need for autonomy. So this is just a long way of saying we have those needs too. And the way our bodies communicate to it what we need of that long list of psychological needs is through emotion. So an emotion is a signal that we then have to decode. Now, hunger or being tired is pretty obvious for most people to decode, right? But it gets more tough with the psychological needs, which are just as basic, and that's really what a lot of therapy is about. So there'd be something missing or not being the way it should in a person's life. But if we don't decode the messenger, then obviously our job would just be to go and push it down all the time.
I think that massively relates to what you said before about safety. I find that a lot of the symptoms that I display that could be classed as a mental health disorder often come from a place of not feeling safe.
Yeah.
And that's the message. And there could be other things, deeper things it's trying to communicate. But I had this moment last year where I was sat at my laptop, and I'm sure everyone's had this moment, and I was trying to get my brain into writing. And for the life of me, I couldn't concentrate. And I forced. I drank coffee. I went for a run. And at this moment, I've been introduced to a concept called the felt sense, that we have a felt sense in our bodies. And I thought, I'm going to try it. So I just sat down, and it wasn't really a meditation. I just sat down and tried to feel how do I feel?
So you just sat and did nothing basically, no over behavior.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it was just
what happened?
How do I feel in my body? And I felt this strange sensation in my chest, kind of a bit like a racing heart, like an energy feel. I felt something in my head, and I realised that what I could have labelled as ADHD, as not being able to concentrate, as feeling like I'm going to bounce off the walls, actually the felt sense was like I was unsafe. And I found that really powerful because the strategy that my body was telling me was I need to move. Something is wrong here. There's a threat. There wasn't. Which was the confusing thing.
So it's a very basic mechanism, right? It would make sense for most people to frame it like this. If there was a lion behind me, if there was an objectively dangerous situation, would I be able to just sit and write and do something in that context stupid? It would be stupid to focus on work if there was a lion just here, right? So the body has a hierarchy, right? So it's such a basic psychological mechanism. It's almost comical. Obviously, if you feel unsafe, you're not supposed to work, and that'll then come out as being unfocused or inattentive. And I'm sure your body tried to make you do a lot of other things than work because you felt unsafe. And safety in particular, like our survival is the basic need. So you could be absolutely sure that takes the front seat once it's challenged. What'd you do then? So what you did, not that this is therapy and it shouldn't be, but it sounds to me like you, for a second there, stopped avoiding it or forcing or pushing your system into something that it wouldn't do. Then what?
I find that the work I've done over the last year on myself has been to connect with my body, and feelings can be really confusing.
Yeah. Yes.
And
they talk in code language, really.
And I love that. I love that you spoke how we had to decode. And I think what I've been learning to do, and I'm still very much learning, is how to decode.
Yeah.
And the thing that helps me decode is to have a space where, kind of like meditation, but I can't sit still. But that's not an excuse.
No.
I rock, I sway,
Yeah.
but I follow the sensations in my body. That is my meditation.
Yeah.
And someone that's been highly anxious at times, that might sound counterintuitive. And for some people, sitting down, closing your eyes and trying to meditate is a bad idea.
It could be traumatic.
Yeah.
It could be the worst.
So I often do my eyes open a little bit, but I find I just sit, I give space, and I just feel. I don't label.
No.
I follow the sensations in my body. And what I start to find is that I feel in the same places. I mentioned my chest, mentioned my face, I get it in my cheeks. And that's how I decode now, because there's a felt sense to each emotion. And it's like the cheat code that no one told me about.
Exactly. And that's because I think for most people it's too basic. Like, it can't be just that. But it's more about doing less, really. That's the point here. And then trusting that there is, and you can call it what you want, spirit, messenger, or call it an inner compass, just the idea that we have someone who constantly, someone or something who constantly keeps track of those needs and values and goals in our life. And if there is a discrepancy, that's what causes the emotion. So, and I like the thought of having something inside me, as you explained so well there, that keeps track of this and lets me know once I'm off. So the fact that the way we get in touch with that is to do less. And that's what people, I think, at least in this day and age, is the recipe for all the distraction going on with social media or Netflix, or constantly staying busy, because that pushes this messenger down, right? But once you start to just do nothing, so you don't have to do anything specifically for it to surface, it just does. And really important here is how to decode without ruminating. Like, this is not a cognitive process. People would get tricked into, and I could see that if people listen here, okay, now I'm going to do a lot of thinking to figure out what my emotions tell me and what I need. Not the way to go. And you're in your head, and usually it's too biased, it's too negative, it's too messy up there. It's down here, right? In the emotion.
There's a quote that I love, and anyone that's heard me speak will have heard me. I think I cite this quote in every single talk. I am not sorry. And it's by Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps a Score. Oh, yeah. And the quote is along the lines, I'm going to butcher this a bit, but the rational mind is basically impotent to talk the emotional mind out of its own reality. And when I read that quote, that was what unlocked this kind of level of like tapping into how I actually feel.
Yeah.
I went down for years a path of reading other books, understanding the psychological theory, like intellectually understanding why I might be depressed, but I was still cut off from my feelings.
Different game.
It is, isn't it?
Different level, yeah.
But we don't talk about that.
No.
I would say over 90%, perhaps, I could be wrong, of the support and the people we hear talking about this. It's all intellectual. It's all in the mind.
Yeah.
And it baffles me.
Yeah, but there can be some sense of safety up there too in some weird way. Like, then I don't have to go down here and figure out what my emotions tell me. And it can be scary. So this is not, again, back to not demonizing anything. Like, whatever a person is doing to regulate their emotion at this point in time is the best thing they can do. Period. Always. So we can't just remove, well, we can. But if you just remove the strategy, the behavior that person, for whatever reason, has arrived at is the best thing, you can't do that. That's not the way we solve problems. You can't just, because you have to understand that the solution. It's the exact same thing as just removing a drug, like in someone addicted to actual drugs. That's a very, very clear strategy too. It's just so concrete. And everyone would know you don't help drug addicts by just removing the drug. You have to approach it as a solution that then causes other problems, but the best solution. So another way to focus is we don't want people At least that's not our immediate goal, to help them remove their strategies. We want to get into the deeper stuff of why they do it. And then the idea would be for that to then naturally resolve. So obviously someone who trusts how to be in their emotions, which can be scary, very, very, very scary. These are powerful forces. But imagine if you if you know yourself well enough and what your emotions want, and you're confident that you know how to regulate them, so you can visit them as you did. You can visit that pain and then know how to get out of it again. Then, and you also know that they won't overwhelm you, and then they're actually all good. That's the irony. All of them are good. Also anxiety wants to protect you. All emotions, all strategies are good. They could just be destructive, but they want good. When you really get to that point of understanding that and being with it, there's less need for the maladaptive strategies, for the short-term strategies. And that's how we solve problems. We don't just remove it.
We create a new strategy.
Yes.
You touched on how, and I agree, how difficult it can be to sit with some of these emotions.
Oh, yeah.
What are the common emotions that we're using these strategies to overcome? Or I like to use the word depress. We depress these emotions.
Yeah. You mean the word depression, right? It's I always like when the words kind of give off what it is. We depress something, and that's why it keeps calling for us. Just as if you stop eating, you can sure your hunger signal will just increase and increase and increase. So, and again, back to the duration thing, like obviously if we keep depressing something, not listen to what it is, but keep overthinking it, not rocket science that it'll keep popping up, right? Because it's a messenger that keeps repeating because we don't listen. And maybe we think we listen, but really what we do is think and overthinking. Yeah. And that's not it. So, I go through all the basic emotions in the book too, like really emotions 101. What is it? Because for some reason, we're not taught this in school, even though it's the forces that drive all of us. So that could be anxiety, sadness, sorrow, shame, anger, grief, would be the basic ones. All unpleasant. They have to be to motivate us to do whatever they're trying to make us do.
We'll touch on the book later, but I really want to go deeper there in the emotions 101. And I talk about this a lot, and I think that it's not a male-only problem, but men often cut ourselves off from our emotions. And it really annoys me that a couple of years ago, it was like the celebrities decided, like, okay, cool, men can be emotional now. No one told us why or how. And I'd actually like to go through each of those emotions only briefly and perhaps talk about them.
Yeah.
The ones that were depressing, because I think it's so important to understand what they are and how we can decode them and what they're trying to tell us.
Let's do it. Which one?
Let's start with
anxiety. The alarm system. Something's wrong. Protective mechanism, really. So it's the smoke detector, really. It's what protects us. It would be a bad biological mechanism to not have anxiety. Problem is when that alarm starts firing, when there's no danger ahead. So usually it's in the form of thoughts, really, like a thought can trigger anxiety. And we'd have to understand that there's a reason for a person to have a lot of anxiety. Something happened in their life, usually that directed their compass in that direction. So usually it makes sense. But anxiety is really just something trying to protect us. Now, we're social creatures, social hierarchical creatures. So we have to understand that protection is not just being something that clearly kills us. It's not that kind. It's also like not being part of the group, for example, not being accepted, not being loved, not being good enough can trigger anxiety just as much as the famous lion or tiger can do in psychology. So not being part of the group in any way is just as much a threat and a trigger of anxiety, which is a physiological response, like our body is ready to fight or flee. What happens if that gets triggered too easily, we end up with an anxiety disorder, or what you want to call it. But it's a protective mechanism, really.
I've heard people say that I think is really powerful is there's a difference between being safe and feeling safe. And that ties in for me with anxiety. Because I look at the obvious things like, is there a threat? And no, but as you say, there's a social standing. Am I worrying about work? Am I worrying about money? There is just so much worry that I've found. So Anxiety is our alarm system that alerts us to threat. How about sadness? Because that's one that I've been disconnected from for a long time. I'm only starting to reconnect. I think that's a hard one for a lot of men too.
So what to look for sadness is usually something missing or something taken away from you. So the best definition of an emotion I know is it's the discrepancy or the gap between where you are and where you want to be, or at least where you perceive yourself to be and where you perceive yourself to want to be. And that gap creates the emotion, just as the hunger did. And with sadness, you're going to look for something that's missing, that's important, obviously, or something that was there has been taken away from you. So it's a very, very friendly emotion, as is anxiety. Actually, all of them are, and that's the way to look at it. Anxiety, too, is usually the trick is to look for something important. Like you won't be anxious about something not important. That changes it. With sadness, it's something you need that isn't there. Being under threat, that can cause sadness, too.
I suppose the most extreme, or one of the most extreme types of sadness could be when we lose a loved one and a loved one passes away in bereavement. So we've lost.
Yes. And with a lot of depression, like, not that sadness and depression is the same. It's really not. It's a different level. But the idea is you can explain a lot of depressions by understanding how sadness works. So understand, and we call depression like it's a condition where like nothing seems interesting, nothing's important, no joy. I don't think it's because nothing's important. I think you reach those states because something that is in fact very important but missing is taking the front seat. So imagine having something really, really important in your life that's not there or has been taken away from you. What your emotional system does is just, it targets that one. So the way you feel, it's just as if you were under threat. This is the most important thing and it's not there. So your emotional system is just busy trying to remind you, hey, you need this, you need this, you need this. But again, it talks in code. So I hope this makes sense. Like the depressed state, that's not because everything doesn't matter. It's not because nothing brings you joy. It's because there's exactly one thing that's very important, but that's not going very well in that person's life. So you can really, really approach a lot of depressions as sheer communication. And so if you're missing something fundamental in your life, from both from a biological and a psychological perspective, it kind of makes sense to me that the emotional system will have to shut down the feedback for less relevant stuff. Like now suddenly it is irrelevant to wake up, to take a walk, to eat healthy, to like these things in the light of what's missing in your life is less relevant. Therefore, your emotional system is not focused on them. Therefore, you have the experience of everything being, irrelevant and joyless. But it's because we haven't decoded it yet.
Wow. Really powerful stuff.
Yeah. And shutting down is a strategy too, I should say, like becoming indifferent, apathic, thank you. That's a strategy too, not shutting down everything. Powerful strategy.
It is very powerful strategy. So sadness is losing or perceiving something that we haven't got that we want.
Yeah.
How about shame?
Shame. So there's a lot of I think there's a lot of social stuff in that. I imagine having no shame. You'd be no capacity to feel shame
in 2025.
But it's going to be really hard to keep up relationships and group cohesion in the healthy way if you literally imagine having no capacity to feel shame. So it's like usually like an ethical, moral situation where you can see yourself from others' perspective and regulate based on that. So if you had none of that, it would be really difficult to take part in groups, which is very, very important for us. Problem is if shame starts attacking you as a person, like instead of you doing something not okay, that you're not okay. And that's what shame does when it really gets destructive, right? Like you're the problem.
I've experienced that. Shame has been a big part of my story. And
horrible emotion.
I'd say so far, shame has been the most difficult emotion to work with. I had a brilliant conversation with the psychiatrist, Professor Joanna Moncrief, and she said something really simple from her many years working in psychiatry, is that a lot of the depressed patients she's seen and worked with often don't like themselves. And it was such a simple way of like relating to that, but relating to people I know and seeing that. And I think the word we don't like to use in our society is we feel a lot of shame.
Yeah. And usually that shame comes about from, because once you get caught up in the short-term strategies, whatever it is, a drug or distracting, isolating, overworking, you know that's, there are other things you don't do that you should be doing. So the recipe for shame really comes in many instances from, because you know that you're doing something wrong in the bigger scheme of things, right? It's not wrong, but it's what you have to do. It has consequences in other areas. So maybe you let people down, maybe you let yourself down, and that's shameful. But we still have to get to the core of it. Like that's not the primary thing. We have to trust that you have some reason to do the quote maladaptive strategies. But because you know the damage they cause for you and others, obviously there's going to be an element of shame, which can be a driver too. Like it's very, very difficult to try to listen to shame because it's so painful. But really, I think that one's is good too. It's cool that we have something that regulates our behaviors, morally, ethically.
It's so powerful.
Yeah.
I think in the interest of time, I probably can't go through all the emotions.
Yeah.
Guilt, I think, is quite similar.
Yeah.
Anger is quite self-explanatory in protecting boundaries.
Yeah, and self-assertion, like it's the opposite of having people walk over us. It's the opposite, That's you, this is me, boundaries. Crossed causes anger. So that's if we understand it and express it in healthy ways, it's an incredible strong emotion. We don't want it to be aggression, but anger itself is not a bad thing.
I found it helpful just when someone crosses a boundary or something, it's quite assertive and it's therapeutic just to kind of express my boundaries.
Yeah.
In the UK, we're known for the saying that I think came out during the war, which was keep calm and carry on. You see it printed on bags. We're very proud of it, which basically means, and I think this is a very helpful strategy if you're alive during a war, is you probably haven't got the time and space to process your emotions, to look at your trauma. But I feel like that attitude, especially in the UK, has stuck with us, where we're quite proud of suppressing our emotions. And we also have the British stipple for lip, where we kind of where we all act strong. And I think there's a debate, especially amongst generations that kind of look at my generation and say we're being a bit soft about looking at this stuff. Why would we go into the emotional ground that's difficult and not just keep calm and carry on?
Well, you could try to keep calm and carry on. I'm sure those messages are strong stuff. Probably your life will going to be revolving around that with all the consequences that is. So if you just keep obeying your safety voice and not the reward voice of wanting to do stuff that is not about protection, it's going to cause problems. But it's just a strong force. Like you could do it, but I'm sure you'll lose at the end or need stronger and stronger strategies to keep it at bay. So, but I guess it's everyone's choice, right?
It is everyone's choice.
But I have yet to find a person who, when we introduce disorders and mental illness in this perspective, that they want to keep pushing it away. It's much more relieving and freeing, really, to do the emotional work. And I'm fairly sure, I'm convinced that it hurts more to not do it than to do it.
That's my opinion too.
And you just mentioned war, like I'm sure you meant an actual war here, but a lot of people ending up struggling with these things have been to war in their own life. And just to get that fact straight, that our strategies don't necessarily update. That's why there's so many strong connections between trauma and quote mental illness. Like something happened in their life, but then the strategies get stuck. So what happens when you start analyzing a person's emotion regulation patterns is that it's something from the past. It's something they learned to do. It's whatever they had to do to survive what happened to them. And then this is a way of thinking about it. If our strategies just updated when we didn't need them anymore, whoop, problem gone, crisis over, life's better. I don't need to give him or her that strategy anymore, the mind saying that. I think there'd be very little mental illness, mental health struggles, if it just updated, but it doesn't.
That would be great. I felt we need some sort of AI to do that.
Yeah, if just updated, but it doesn't. No, because...
We had I agree. If the strategies just updated themselves...
If they did,
that would be great.
And that's the way of thinking about it. Like what we're struggling with today whatever it is, was a solution back then, and then our job is to update it and make that connection.
I read something in your book that was really eye-opening for me, and I kind of wish I'd have read it a couple of years ago. And you said that we don't need to get to the bottom of all our emotions and our patterns in order to heal and grow. How come?
Not as it, because we have to trust that whatever it is, that has been the function, and you don't need to get to the bottom of it. Like, you can, and there's value to it. Like, I think there's value. It's easier to change a strategy if you really, really know and believe where it started. It's connect, but you don't have to get to the bottom of it. Problem with that strategy is it's probably going to take a lot of thinking and analyzing and, diving into it. And it's not necessarily that concrete. And you could turn it around even. You could know 100%, you could have tracked where this all started in your life and what happened to you, what trauma or adversity led you into those strategies without them resolving. So it's two different questions.
I think a lot of therapists need to hear that.
Yes, a lot of, and we call it co-rumination even. Like, a lot of therapy, it can be co-rumination. We'll just meet the next week and analyze further. And if there's still a problem, we haven't analyzed it enough. So these are just two, for me, very different questions. Why? The why? How can we find meaning in the patterns you've not ended up in, but are currently in? And then how to do exactly in your life right now when some emotion triggers you, or something happens that's painful, that's in the way. How do I regulate it? What then do I do instead of resorting to my short-term strategies? How do I be with it, think about it differently, be mindful of it? Leave it alone is the famous strategy for me. I really like that one. To leave something alone, just be with it. It'll self-regulate.
So your book, Crossing Zero, is about many things, including medication.
Yeah.
If we take antidepressants, for example, what kind of strategy are you deploying there?
Yeah. So first thing is to even understand medication as a strategy. And that's what I use the first, 50 pages or something to argue. That if you look at the definition of emotion regulation, that fits exactly what psychiatric drugs do, all of them. Once you understand they don't fix certain things, they certainly work on the chemical level in the brain, but it's not like they fix anything. It's just as much a strategy as avoidance or cutting yourself or distracting yourself or overthinking or overworking. It's a strategy, and that really changes things to look at it that way, because then we can look at medication the same way like we did in the past hour talking about strategies. It's just another strategy aimed at usually numbing or distancing yourself from some pain. So you can use all the questions that we've talked about so far for medication. It's another strategy. And psychiatry hates it, really, biological, because it's so simple. It takes the specialty out of it. If we don't have to be that interested in what it does in the brain, but just look at it as a drug effect. Just another thing you can do to regulate how you feel.
I've seen that in my own experience and friends that have taken it as a strategy because they feel overwhelmed and they have no other strategy. They feel like there's no other strategy available to them at the moment. So they've taken it or carried on taking it, and I don't offer any judgment there.
No.
What is it that led you to write the book then?
Because we have, so part of it is that even though we talk about it as a strategy, and even though you reach a point in your life where you don't need that strategy anymore, because you've moved on or got other strategies, or you're in a different situation, now you don't need the numbing effect anymore, then you can't just stop. Those are two different things, because your body will have adapted, which is what I did my PhD in, was not psychotherapy, it was in psychiatry, helping people come off these drugs. So it's really important to understand that even though you've reached a point in your life where you don't need it anymore, it still needs to be tapered off gradually and slowly, sometimes over years, because otherwise what will happen is you enter withdrawal, which, confusing as it is, can look as the original condition. So part of the reason why I wrote the book is that we have a lot of knowledge on how to come off these drugs safely. A lot of knowledge, both in the research and the layperson community. But it's not out there. So I really just wanted to go directly to the consumer or the person in distress on these medications, giving them knowledge on how to come off safely. Because, oh man, the guidelines out there and how the practices are there, they're decades behind on what we actually know. So I wanted to share that message. So, and as I call it in the subtitle, it's about coming off the actual technicalities of tapering what happens in the brain, what's the withdrawal symptoms, how to reduce the dose, how to not reduce the dose, how long to wait, and then the next part is what we've talked about so far. Then how to stay off, how to regulate emotions without a drug, because not that the exact same. Don't think of it like it's not like your exact same emotions from back then you started are going to pop back up. That's not the story we want to tell. But your full range of emotions usually comes back online once you're off the drug. So for me, it was really important for me. It's about both how to come off and how to then manage your life without that medication. Because if you've been used to numbing or distancing or altering or distorting or whatever the drug did, your emotions and your thoughts, and it comes back, it can be a really tough transition if you do it too fast.
I took an antidepressant for 4 months. It wasn't for me, and I was fortunate that I was quite easily able to come off. And although I'm not taking the medication, I found your book really helpful. Like, granted, the middle part about coming off them is perhaps not as relevant because I'm not taking them. Nope. But the beginning and end was so useful, like so useful. What are the more helpful strategies people can use to decode these emotions that are coming up?
Yeah, so obviously a drug can be a helpful strategy if you're looking for short-term relief. Like for many people, the drugs don't even do that. It doesn't work for everyone. And in fact, if you just look at the stats, it is more common not to respond to these drugs than to. But let's leave that for another day. Another strategy, if you ask me, as the psychologist in me, would be to insist on understanding what those, quote, symptoms try to tell you. Sometimes it's the pain you're trying to numb with a drug, trying to approach it as something that has a message there for you. And it can sound a bit fluffy and a bit romanticizing that we need to listen to it all. We don't. Sometimes it's what we'd call a primary emotion. It's something in your life right now. The list we went through, something you're missing, something that's too much, a value you're ignoring, a goal you're ignoring, a need you're ignoring. Sometimes it's something that needs to change here and now. We call that primary emotions. But sometimes the listening to the emotions will point you to, the past. It's a trauma reaction that was the reverse, that you don't want to follow. So you're just in a situation that reminds your mind and body enough from a trauma that happened so it triggers it. And that's really what I talk about with an emotion being a best guess. An emotion is your body's best guess at what's happening. And sometimes it isn't what's happening. So if you follow a trauma reaction, it will just lead you around in circles, right? So when I say the alternative to numbing it, at least long term, would be to figure out what that signal is trying to tell you. It doesn't mean that you have to change anything necessarily in your life right now. That would be just as much a mistake as ignoring all of them. And again, the mechanism is pretty basic. All of them actually are. Like the body keeps a record of what went wrong in the past and adversities for it to react extremely quickly should it happen again. And that's what we famously call a trigger. You get triggered. Something in your surroundings, something in the way people behave, something in the energies, to use that word, reminded your alarm system enough from a past trauma that it just triggered, okay, maybe we're here again. Maybe it's repeating. But those antennae get really, they can stretch out wide, right? So it catches, and it's because of false negative, so it catches a situation as dangerous even though it's not. But that still means, the road to that point is still to understand the emotion and decode it. So sometimes in the past, sometimes in the present. And regardless of whether it's past or present, it involves an element of being able to be with it. And it sounds like I'm sure you could recognize that. It sounds like the most lame advice. Are you telling me to just sit here and be with it? Because that will overwhelm me and it will escalate and it'll be painful. Usually, a way to think of it is that when it escalates and overwhelms, that's usually because we resisted in the process. That's what makes it escalate. If we do what you just did before, sit with it, be with it, it's usually pretty friendly energies, actually, if you learn to do that.
And a good therapist will be able to sit with you in that.
Yeah, that's what we're trained in.
For people that haven't got access to therapy for whatever reason, a friend perhaps that is able to sit there, that they're hard to find, but sit there and not fix.
Yeah.
What other tools or people might be able to help us just be able to sit with that and start the process of decoding these emotions?
Yeah. And you could always, when you do that, you could just do it 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes. You could always retreat back into your strategies. You could always go back to safety if it gets too much, really. But yeah, this is what therapists are or should be trained in doing. How do we enter that emotional landscape and leave it again in a healthy way when the session's over, creating a good experience of being in touch with what's there without it overwhelming you. That's therapeutic in itself. And it makes it less dangerous. It can be a minefield if you don't understand.
Yeah, I think having someone to sit with you there and not feeling like you have to do it all at once,
Yeah.
and having that support and connection is so important. And it can be hard to find, especially if you haven't got access to a therapist. But I don't think it's therapy or nothing.
Yeah.
I think there's some brilliant groups out there,
Yeah.
friends, family members. There are people out there that get this.
Yeah.
One bit of my well, I'd say advice that I'd offer, actually, I don't really like offering advice, but when you can actually start to understand the emotion, you've done the basic premise of decoding. So I can start talking about shame. I do it with my partner now.
Yeah.
I'll start to feel ashamed, like there'll be a hint of a mistake or something, and the strong shame response will happen. And I'll just openly say, I'm feeling the shame, I don't feel good enough.
Yeah.
That in itself is a huge step. And yes, a therapist can help you get there, but
Yeah.
you might not necessarily need a therapist. Just being able to say, just being able to communicate, this has happened and I feel angry.
Yeah.
I feel sad about this, is a game changer.
Labeling it, yeah. It's a way of regulating it.
Yeah. But my experience is if we use the mental healthy labels, like my clinical depression's playing up again, you feel a lot of stigma. You don't want to say that. Whereas I say, I feel sad about this. I feel the sense of not being good enough. I feel angry. We can all connect and relate to that.
And that's really one of my go-to strategies, too, or one of my missions, I should say. Use normal language. Like everything, once you start calling it a depression or whatever disorder, you distance yourself from the actual core of it. Use normal words for tough things and emotions and see where that directs you instead of using the diagnostic language. It's going to be part of the problem. And then I should just add, there's a whole section in the book on how to use your attention to regulate emotions, like how to not in an act of distraction, but controlling attention. Like you can, just as we can use we're pretty free to move our gaze where we want to, right? I'm sure most people would agree. I could look at whatever I want. We could use the attention for the same thing too. So there are some very strong attention training techniques that work as concrete alternatives to numbing once you understand how the attention works.
You've put a lot into one book. How do people find it?
It's called Crossing Zero, The Art and Science of Coming Off and Staying Off Psychiatric Drugs. A long title. It's on Amazon.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Anders. I think we have to do another one of these because I could have stayed and chatted here forever. I've got 2 pages of questions. I think I've asked 5 out of 15. So
I'll fly over again.
We will go again.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks.
I want to be very clear that we're not suggesting anyone should stop taking their antidepressants. As you've heard, they're serious drugs. And whilst it's important we're informed, it's equally as important that we don't make any changes without the support of a doctor. I've included a link to Anders' book, Crossing Zero, in the show notes if you'd like to find out more. Well, you've stayed until the end, so you're basically part of our community now. And I need your help. I've paid for the whole of season 1 myself, and I'm running on fumes now. I'm trying to raise 1,200 quid to cover the cost of season 2. Every penny will go towards creating episodes that help people who are feeling lost and alone. If you found this episode helpful and you're able to chip in, then please do help us to help others. You can donate towards season 2 by heading to my Ko-fi page, which you can find in the show notes. Also, if you're in London and you want to, join our Reconnect waiting list at reconnect.club, or if you'd like me to speak at your organisation, it's joetudor.com. Thank you for your help in growing the Reconnect community. Until next time, see ya.